Hell's Angel gets a call from the hospital. She listed you as emergency contact. The familiar rumble of motorcycles filled the air as another group pulled into the parking lot of Johnny's Bar and Grill. The door swung open, bringing a blast of cool air. "McKenna!" shouted Snake, an old riding buddy, making his way to Charlie's spot. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight. Thought you were getting too old for this scene." "Still young enough to drink you under the table," Charlie shot back, raising his bottle in a mock toast. The laughter and conversation continued to flow, mixing with the classic rock from the jukebox. Charlie, the former Hell's Angel, watched the familiar scene. The rough camaraderie, the same old stories, the discussions of bikes and custom paint jobs. Johnny's Bar was their sanctuary, where they could still be who they remembered being, creating a bubble of warmth and belonging in the cool evening air. The neon beer signs cast a warm glow across the bar, painting shadows on the leather-clad figures crowded around Charlie McKenna. His deep laugh rumbled above the din as he gestured with his bottle, telling a story everyone had heard before but still loved. "So there I am, coming around Dead Man's Curve at midnight," Charlie said, his weathered face creasing with a grin. Bikes screaming, tires barely touching the road. "Must have been doing 90, maybe more. More like 70. Bill, an old road brother, chuckled. "Your memory's getting better with age, Charlie." Charlie shot him a mock glare. "You calling me a liar, Bill?" But there was no heat in his words, just the easy familiarity of men who'd shared thousands of miles of open road together. The gathering was special, the anniversary of a legendary race that had put their crew on the map decades ago. The bar smelled of spilled beer and cigarette smoke, mixed with the lingering scent of motor oil that seemed to follow bikers everywhere. Charlie took another swig of his beer, letting the others carry the conversation. His eyes drifted to the mirror behind the bar, catching his reflection. Gray hair now peppered his temples, and the lines around his eyes were deeper than ever. Time had a way of sneaking up on a person. "Remember Jenny from the Red Rock?" Someone called out. "Man, she could drink any of us under the table." The group erupted in laughter, but Charlie's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. These stories were comfortable, safe, like an old leather jacket that fit just right. But lately, they felt hollow, echoing with everything he'd lost along the way. The sharp ring of his phone cut through the noise. Charlie usually ignored calls during these gatherings, but something made him reach for it this time. Maybe it was the unfamiliar number, or maybe it was just time for something different. "Yeah?" he answered gruffly, pressing one finger against his other ear to hear better. "Mr. McKenna?" A woman's professional voice came through clearly. "This is Nurse Reynolds from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling because you're listed as the emergency contact for Maggie Davis." Charlie's forehead creased. "Maggie who?" "Maggie Davis," the nurse repeated. "She's been admitted in critical condition, and we need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." Charlie straightened on his bar stool. "Lady, I think there's been a mistake. I don't know any Maggie Davis." "Sir, you're definitely listed as her emergency contact. She's unconscious right now, and we need someone to make some decisions about her care." Charlie rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble under his palm. The noise of the bar seemed to fade away as he tried to place the name. Maggie Davis. Maggie Davis. Nothing. "Mr. McKenna?" the nurse prompted. "Can you come?" Charlie looked around at his friends, their faces now turned toward him with curious concern. These were his people, his comfort zone. But something in the nurse's voice tugged at him. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'll be there." He slammed the phone down on the bar with more force than necessary, making the nearby bottles rattle. The laughter had died down, replaced by questioning looks from his road brothers. "Gotta go," Charlie announced, standing up. "Got business to take care of." Bill reached out, catching his arm. "Everything okay, brother?" Charlie shrugged him off, already pulling on his leather jacket. "Just something I need to handle." Without another word, he pushed through the crowd and headed for the door, leaving his confused friends staring after him. The wind whipped against Charlie's leather jacket as his Harley thundered down the empty streets. Streetlights cast long shadows across his path, matching the dark thoughts swirling in his mind. Maggie Davis. The name bounced around in his head like a stray bullet, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't place it. Must be some mistake, he muttered into the wind, his grip tightening on the handlebars. Charlie hadn't been anyone's emergency contact in years, not since leaving the Angels. He'd made sure of that, cutting ties clean as a knife through butter. The hospital loomed ahead, its windows glowing like tired eyes in the darkness. Charlie pulled into the parking lot, the rumble of his bike echoing off concrete walls. He sat there for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, fighting the urge to turn around and head back to the bar. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, releasing that sharp hospital smell, antiseptic, and something else he couldn't name. The reception area was quiet except for the squeak of rubber-soled shoes and the distant beeping of machines. "I'm here about Maggie Davis," Charlie said, his gruff voice too loud in the hushed space. "Got a call saying I'm her emergency contact." The receptionist typed something into her computer, her face bathed in blue light. "Yes, Mr. McKenna. Please wait here." A nurse appeared moments later, her scrubs decorated with tiny, cartoon animals that seemed to mock the seriousness of her expression. She barely looked at him as she turned, expecting him to follow. "Miss Davis was brought in this morning," the nurse explained, leading him through a maze of corridors. Her shoes squeaked against the polished floor. She lost consciousness at home. A neighbor found her. "Look, there must be some mistake," Charlie said, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "I don't know any Maggie Davis." The nurse stopped at a computer station, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "You're Charles McKenna, correct? Former resident of 742 Pine Street?" Charlie's stomach dropped. He had lived there, years ago, after his accident. "Yeah, that's me, but—" "Then you're the right person." Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Miss Davis specifically listed you as her emergency contact. She's in critical condition, Mr. McKenna. Stage 4 cancer. She's been unconscious for several hours now." Charlie's mouth went dry. Cancer. The word hit him like a physical blow. "But why me? There must be someone else. Family? Friends?" The nurse's expression softened slightly. "You're all we have, Mr. McKenna. The decision about her care may fall to you." They stopped outside room 412. The door was closed, and through the small window, Charlie could see the outline of medical equipment, their lights blinking steadily in the dim room. Charlie stood there, staring at the door handle. His reflection in the window looked old and uncertain, nothing like the tough biker who'd been holding court at the bar just an hour ago. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy chain. Maggie Davis. The name still meant nothing, but somewhere in the back of his mind, an uneasy feeling stirred. Something about Pine Street, about a time he'd rather forget, about kindness he might have ignored. He stood there, frozen, one hand half raised toward the door handle, wrestling with thoughts he couldn't or quite grasp. Charlie stepped into the room, his boots squeaking against the polished hospital floor. The steady beep of monitors filled the silence as he approached the bed. Under harsh fluorescent lights, Maggie Davis lay still, tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. Her silver hair spread across the pillow like a faded halo, her skin paper-thin and pale. Something nagged at the back of his mind. That face, he knew it from somewhere. Images flickered through his memory. A modest house with a well-kept garden, cheerful window boxes full of red geraniums, and a woman who always smiled and waved when he rode past on his motorcycle. "McKenna?" A nurse in blue scrubs entered, clipboard in hand. "I'm Sarah. I've been caring for Maggie these past few days." Charlie cleared his throat. I I think I remember her from the neighborhood. Always had flowers out front of her house on Pine Street, right? That's right. Sarah checked one of the monitors. She lived there for 40 years. Such a sweet lady, always bringing cookies to the nursing station when she came in for her treatments. Treatments? Charlie's voice came out rougher than he intended. Sarah's expression softened. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She's been fighting it alone for almost a year now. She paused, adjusting Maggie's blanket with gentle hands. No family to speak of. Her husband passed years ago, and her children. She trailed off, shaking her head. Charlie shifted uncomfortably. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy chain. Why me? I barely knew her, she never said. Sarah consulted her clipboard. Mr. McKenna, I hate to push you, but we need some immediate decisions about her care. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly. She pulled out several forms. We need to know your wishes regarding resuscitation if her heart stops, and whether to continue aggressive treatment or move to comfort care only. Charlie's throat went dry. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. He stared at Maggie's face, trying to understand why this woman, this virtual stranger, had placed such enormous trust in him. The forms in Sarah's hands might as well have been written in Chinese for all the sense they made to him. How? He swallowed hard. How long does she have? Days, maybe hours. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. We need these decisions soon, Mr. McKenna. Charlie ran a hand through his gray hair, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. The situation felt surreal. Here he was, a former Hell's Angel, being asked to make life-and-death decisions for a woman who'd done nothing more than wave to him from her garden. The irony wasn't lost on him. He looked at Maggie again, noticing how small she seemed in the hospital bed. There had to be more to this story. Why would she choose him? What made her think he, of all people, could be trusted with something this important? I need. Charlie's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I need a minute to think. Sarah nodded understandingly. Of course. I'll be at the nurse's station when you're ready. Charlie waited until her footsteps faded away before taking a deep breath. The monitors continued their steady beeping as he stared at Maggie's unconscious form, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't answer. After a long moment, he turned and walked out of the room, his boots echoing in the quiet hallway as he headed toward the lobby, searching for space to clear his head. Charlie McKenna slumped into one of the hard plastic chairs in the hospital lobby, his leather jacket creaking as he leaned forward. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty waiting area. He rubbed his weathered face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble against his palms. Hospitals had never been his thing. In his younger days, he'd been here plenty of times, broken bones, road rash, concussions from wild nights and wilder rides. But he'd always been the patient, never the one making decisions for someone else. A janitor pushed his cart past, the wheels squeaking against the linoleum floor. Charlie watched him go, thinking about how many times he must have seen scenes like this, people waiting, wondering, worrying about loved ones. Except Maggie wasn't his loved one. He barely knew her. What am I supposed to do here? He muttered to himself, his voice rough with frustration. The responsibility felt like a heavy chain around his neck, dragging him down. Comfort care meant letting her go peacefully. Aggressive treatment meant fighting, but maybe just prolonging the inevitable. His mind wandered back, trying to piece together what he knew about Maggie Davis. She lived 3 blocks down from him, in that little yellow house with the flower boxes. Always tending to those flowers, rain or shine. He'd passed by countless times on his bike, sometimes catching a glimpse of her working in the garden. She'd always wave, even when he pretended not to notice. Charlie stood up, his boots echoing in the empty lobby as he paced. Why him? Of all people, why would she choose him? He wasn't family. Wasn't even a friend. Just a neighbor who'd never bothered to stop and talk. The memory hit him suddenly that time 2 years ago when he'd wiped out on his bike. Nothing serious, just some scrapes and bruises. But he'd been sitting on his front steps, cursing at his torn-up knee. Maggie had appeared with a first aid kit and a gentle smile. He'd grumbled something about being fine, but she'd cleaned and bandaged his knee anyway. Didn't say much, just helped and left. "Sir?" A nurse's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood there in purple scrubs, clipboard in hand, her face tired but kind. "I have an update about Miss Davis." Charlie's stomach tightened. He straightened up, trying to look more put together than he felt. "Her condition hasn't improved," the nurse continued, glancing at her clipboard. "The doctor needs to know soon what direction you want to take with her care. I know it's a difficult decision, but we need to know, do we continue with aggressive treatment or do we focus on making her comfortable?" The words hung in the air between them. Charlie felt the weight of them pressing down on his shoulders, heavier than any motorcycle he'd ever lifted. Here he was, a former Hell's Angel, tasked with deciding the fate of a woman whose kindness he'd barely acknowledged. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor will be down in about 20 minutes to discuss the details," the nurse replied. "He'll need your decision then." Charlie nodded, watching as the nurse walked away. 20 minutes to decide the fate of someone who, for whatever reason, had trusted him with her life. He sank back into the plastic chair, the magnitude of the choice before him settling in like a cold fog. Charlie picked up one of the photographs from Maggie's nightstand. A younger version of her smiled back at him, surrounded by people at what looked like a community center. Her warm eyes sparkled with the same kindness he'd seen around the neighborhood, though he'd never bothered to notice it before. "She was always here, you know," a gentle voice said behind him. Charlie turned to see Sarah, one of the night nurses, entering the room with fresh supplies. Even before she got sick, Maggie spent more time volunteering at the hospital than most of our paid staff. Charlie set the photo down carefully. "Volunteering?" Sarah nodded, checking Maggie's vitals. "Oh, yes. She was everywhere. The hospital, homeless shelters, soup kitchens, never missed a day unless she absolutely had to. She adjusted Maggie's blanket with practiced care. Even when times were tough for her, she'd be out there helping others." "I didn't know," Charlie mumbled, more to himself than to Sarah. "Most people didn't. She never wanted recognition." Sarah smiled sadly. "There's a whole drawer of thank you cards in her house from people she's helped." The social worker who visited her home found them. Maggie kept every single one. As Sarah continued her routine checks, more staff members dropped by. Each had a story about Maggie. The cafeteria worker remembered how she'd bring home-baked cookies every Wednesday for the children in the pediatric ward. The janitor recalled how she'd stay late after her volunteer shifts to keep lonely patients company. Then came the memory that hit Charlie like a punch to the gut. "Wait," he said, interrupting an orderly's story. "Did you say she used to bring meals to people recovering at home?" The orderly nodded. "For years. Called it her Healing Meals program. She'd cook for anyone who needed it. Elderly folks, single parents, people recovering from surgery or accidents." Charlie's hands gripped the edge of Maggie's bed. 5 years ago, after his motorcycle accident, someone had left containers of hot food on his porch every evening for weeks. He'd never known who it was, hadn't wanted to know. His pride wouldn't let him accept help back then, so he'd pretended to ignore the gifts, though he'd eaten every bite. "It was her," he whispered, his throat tight. "She was the one." A social worker named Tom entered the room, holding a worn envelope. "Mr. McKenna, we found this while organizing Miss Davis's paperwork. It's a letter she wrote to her children." He handed it to Charlie. "Never sent. Might help you understand why she chose you as her emergency contact." Charlie's weathered hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. Maggie's neat handwriting filled the page. My dearest children, I know we've grown apart over the years, and perhaps that's my fault. I spent so much time helping others that maybe I didn't show you how much I needed you too. But I see now that sometimes the hardest people to reach are the ones closest to our hearts. I keep hoping that one day, like others I've helped, you'll be ready to let love back in. Charlie couldn't read anymore. The words blurred as his eyes welled up. He thought about all the people he'd pushed away over the years. His own daughter, old friends, anyone who tried to get close. He'd been so focused on maintaining his tough exterior that he'd built walls too high for even those who loved him to climb. The letter shook in his hands as he carefully folded it and placed it back in its envelope. Looking at Maggie's peaceful face, he finally understood why she'd chosen him. She'd seen through his walls years ago, recognized his pain and helped him anyway, even when he'd been too proud to acknowledge it. Charlie's weathered hands trembled as he held Maggie's letter, his mind drifting back to that rainy night 5 years ago. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd been showing off on his Harley, taking a corner too fast on wet pavement. The bike had slid out from under him, sending him skidding across the asphalt like a rag doll. He remembered lying in his small apartment afterward, his body wrapped in bandages, pride wounded worse than his injuries. The doctors had warned him about moving too much. But he'd been stubborn, refusing help from anyone. That's when Maggie had first appeared at his door. I brought you some soup, she'd said simply, holding up a plastic container. He'd tried to shut the door in her face, but she'd already stepped inside. Charlie shifted uncomfortably in the hospital waiting room chair, the memory becoming clearer with each passing moment. Maggie had come by every day for weeks, leaving food on his doorstep when he wouldn't answer. Sometimes it was soup, other times a casserole or fresh bread. He'd find the containers waiting for him, still warm, with simple notes attached. Hope you're feeling better, or let me know if you need anything. He'd ignored her kindness, eaten the food in silence, and never once said thank you. But she kept coming back. One particularly bad day, when the pain had been almost unbearable, she'd found him struggling to change his bandages. Without a word, she'd helped him, her gentle hands working quickly and efficiently. He'd been too weak to protest, too proud to express gratitude. You don't have to be alone, Charlie, she'd told him that day. He'd just grunted in response. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room buzzed overhead as Charlie ran his rough hands over his face. How many times had Maggie checked on him? How many meals had she prepared? How many times had she offered help while he'd turned away, pretending he didn't see her? She'd never asked for anything in return, never demanded recognition or gratitude. She'd simply been there, a quiet presence offering support when he'd needed it most. The weight of his ingratitude pressed down on his chest like a stone. He'd been so wrapped up in his tough guy image, so determined to prove he didn't need anyone, that he'd pushed away one of the few people who'd shown him genuine kindness. Charlie looked down at the letter again, seeing it with new eyes. The same selflessness that had driven Maggie to help him was evident in every word she'd written to her children. Even in her pain and loneliness, she'd been thinking of others. His fingers tightened around the paper, crinkling it slightly. The shame of his past behavior mixed with a sudden, fierce determination. He stood up from the uncomfortable waiting room chair, his joints protesting the sudden movement. That stubborn pride that had kept him isolated for so long crumbled away, replaced by an overwhelming need to make things right. Maggie had been there for him when he'd needed someone most, even though he'd been too blind to see it. Now she needed someone, and this time, he wouldn't turn away. Charlie clenched the letter in his fist, his jaw set with resolve. His eyes flashed with determination as he stood there in the quiet hospital corridor, the weight of his past mistakes finally lifting to make way for purpose. Charlie's fingers trembled as he dialed the first number on the wrinkled hospital form. The phone rang several times before a woman's hesitant voice answered. "Hello? This is Sarah Davis?" Charlie cleared his throat. "I'm calling about your mother, Maggie Davis. I'm—" He paused, unsure how to explain his connection. "I'm listed as her emergency contact at Memorial Hospital." There was a long silence on the other end. "Oh," Sarah finally said, her voice tight. "I haven't spoken to Mom in. It's been a while." "She's very sick," Charlie said, his gruff voice softening. "The doctors don't think she has much time left." Another painful silence followed. "I don't know if I can," Sarah's voice cracked. "It's complicated." Charlie paced the hospital corridor, his heavy boots echoing against the linoleum floor. "Look, I understand complicated, but she needs you now." The second call, to Maggie's son Michael, went similarly. His voice was defensive, guarded. "Who are you anyway? Why are you involved in this?" Charlie ran a hand through his gray hair. "I'm trying to make that right. You don't know our history," Michael said flatly. "No, I don't," Charlie admitted. "But I know about regret. Been carrying it around like a heavy chain for years. Trust me, you don't want more of it." He spoke with each of them for nearly an hour, listening to their pain, their justifications, their fears. They talked about missed opportunities, misunderstandings, and the gradual drift that had turned into an unbridgeable gap. Or what they thought was unbridgeable. "I'll be here," Charlie promised. "I'll meet you at the entrance. You won't have to do this alone." By early afternoon, both had agreed to come. Sarah would arrive that evening, Michael the following morning. Charlie felt drained but relieved, like he'd just finished a long ride through rough terrain. He made his way back to Maggie's room, the beeping of monitors, a steady rhythm he'd grown accustomed to. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across her still form. Charlie lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and took her hand. It felt small and fragile in his weathered palm, her skin cool to the touch. The tough exterior he'd maintained for so many years crumbled a little as he looked at her peaceful face. "I'm sorry, Maggie," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Sorry I didn't see what you were trying to do back then. Sorry I was too stubborn to accept your kindness." He squeezed her hand gently. "Your kids are coming. I know it's been a long time, but they're coming. Just hold on a little longer." The monitors continued their steady rhythm as Charlie sat there, holding Maggie's hand, waiting for her children to arrive. Years of missed connections and unspoken gratitude hung in the air between them, but for now, all he could do was be present, offering the same quiet support she had once given him. Charlie stood awkwardly by the door as Maggie's children entered the hospital room. Her daughter Sarah wore a crisp business suit, while her son Michael had clearly come straight from his office, his tie loosened around his neck. Their faces were tight with discomfort as they approached their mother's bed. "She looks so small," Sarah whispered, her voice catching. Michael hung back, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Charlie cleared his throat. "The nurses say she's comfortable. They're taking good care of her." Sarah nodded stiffly, while Michael continued to stare at his mother's pale face. The beeping of monitors filled the uncomfortable silence. "I don't understand why she didn't tell us she was sick," Michael finally said, his voice rough. "We would have." "Would you have?" Charlie asked quietly. "From what I hear, it's been years since anyone's visited." Sarah's head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. "You don't know anything about our family." "You're right. I don't," Charlie admitted, running a hand through his gray hair. but I know something about pride and pushing people away. I know what it's like to think you don't need anyone, until it's too late. He moved closer to Maggie's bed, careful not to disturb any of the tubes or wires. Your mother helped me once, years ago. I was too stubborn to thank her then. She brought me food, checked on me when I was hurt. Never asked for anything in return. That's the kind of person she is. Michael sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. She was always helping everyone else. The neighborhood kids, the homeless shelter downtown. But never asking for help herself. Sarah finished softly, touching her mother's hand. Charlie nodded. The nurses tell me she's been fighting this cancer alone for months, still volunteering when she could, still trying to make a difference. Tears began rolling down Sarah's cheeks. Why didn't she call us? Maybe she thought you were too busy, Charlie said gently. Maybe she was afraid you wouldn't come. Sometimes it's harder to reach out to the people we love most. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. We were angry for so long. After Dad left, she threw herself into helping others. We felt abandoned, Sarah whispered. But we were the ones who left, weren't we? The siblings looked at each other, years of unspoken hurt passing between them. Charlie stepped back, giving them space as they moved closer to their mother's bed. I'm sorry, Mom, Michael said, taking her other hand. We should have been here. Sarah smoothed Maggie's gray hair back from her forehead. We were so wrapped up in our own lives, our own pain. We forgot that you were hurting too. They stayed for hours, sharing memories of their childhood, of times before the family had fractured. Charlie listened as they talked about Maggie's famous chocolate chip cookies, how she never missed a school play or baseball game, how she'd worked 2 jobs to put them through college. As evening approached, Sarah and Michael reluctantly prepared to leave. They both looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a heavy weight had begun to lift. We'll be back first thing tomorrow, Sarah told Charlie, adjusting her purse strap. Thank you for calling us, for making us face this. Michael nodded in agreement. Mom always saw the good in people. I guess she saw something in you too. Charlie watched them walk down the hallway together, their steps in sync. Through the window, he could see them pause in the parking lot, talking quietly, before getting into their separate cars. They'd promised to return tomorrow, and for the first time, he believed they meant it. The morning light filtered weakly through the hospital blinds as Charlie stepped into Maggie's room. Something was different. The steady beeping of machines had changed its rhythm, becoming more urgent, more insistent. A team of medical staff huddled around her bed, their faces drawn with concern. Dr. Peterson, a tall woman with graying hair and kind eyes, motioned for Charlie to step outside. Her expression told him everything before she spoke a word. Mr. McKenna, she began, her voice gentle but firm. Maggie's organs are starting to fail. The cancer has spread more aggressively than we anticipated, and her body isn't responding to treatment anymore. Charlie's throat tightened. He leaned against the wall, his leather jacket suddenly feeling too heavy on his shoulders. What are you saying exactly? We've done everything we can, Doctor, Peterson explained, clasping her hands in front of her. At this point, we need to discuss end-of-life care. The machines are keeping her alive, but her condition is deteriorating rapidly. Charlie's chest felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. He'd only just started to understand who Maggie was, what she meant to him. And now he had to decide whether to let her go. The irony wasn't lost on him. He, who had pushed her away when she tried to help him years ago, now held her fate in his hands. What are my options? He asked, his voice rougher than usual. We can continue life support, but it won't improve her condition. It will only prolong the inevitable. Doctor, Peterson paused, letting the information sink in. or we can focus on making her comfortable in her final hours." Charlie walked back into Maggie's room, pulling up the chair that had become his regular spot over the past few days. The machines continued their relentless chorus, pumping air into her lungs, monitoring her failing heart. He studied her face, peaceful despite everything, and thought about the woman who had quietly tried to save him all those years ago. "I'm sorry," he whispered, taking her thin hand in his. "I was too stubborn to see what you were doing for me back then." A nurse came in to check Maggie's vitals, moving efficiently around Charlie as he sat there, lost in thought. Her children had just started to come around. They needed more time with her, needed a chance to make things right, just as he did. Dr. Peterson returned, clipboard in hand. "Mr. McKenna, we need your decision." Charlie looked up, his weathered face set with determination. "Keep her on life support," he said firmly. "Her kids, they need more time. They just started coming around. I can't take that away from them." The doctor nodded, understanding. "We'll continue supportive care, but I want you to be prepared. Her condition could change at any moment." "I understand," Charlie replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Just give them a chance to say goodbye properly. They deserve that much. She deserves that much." Doctor Peterson made some notes on her clipboard and left quietly, leaving Charlie alone with Maggie and the steady rhythm of the machines keeping her alive. He settled back in his chair, still holding her hand, carrying the weight of his decision like another scar on his heart. Charlie stood in the hospital parking lot, squinting against the afternoon sun. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A small crowd had gathered near the entrance, maybe 15 or 20 people. They weren't the usual hospital visitors with their flowers and get-well cards. These people looked different, each in their own way. An elderly man in threadbare clothes clutched a handmade card. A young mother held her toddler close, tears streaming down her face. A teenager with bright blue hair stood awkwardly in worn sneakers, shuffling from foot to foot. They all shared the same expression of genuine concern. "Are you Charlie?" the elderly man asked, stepping forward. "The nurses told us you're looking after Maggie." Charlie nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, that's me. Maggie helped me get back on my feet when I lost my job," the man said, his voice cracking. "Brought me meals every day for 3 months. Never asked for anything in return." The young mother spoke next. "She watched my son for free while I finished nursing school. I wouldn't have my career without her." One by one, they shared their stories. Maggie had helped the blue-haired teen escape an abusive home. She'd driven an elderly couple to their doctor's appointments for years. She'd organized fundraisers for families in need, always working behind the scenes, never taking credit. Charlie's chest tightened as he listened. All this time, while he'd been wrapped up in his own world of leather jackets and motorcycle engines, Maggie had been quietly changing lives. She'd never bragged about it, never sought recognition. She'd just helped because that's who she was. Inside the hospital, Charlie found Maggie's children had returned. They sat on either side of their mother's bed, their faces drawn with exhaustion and emotion. The daughter held Maggie's hand, while the son adjusted her blanket with gentle movements. "We found Mom's diary," the daughter said, her voice soft. "She wrote about everyone she helped, but not like you'd expect. She wrote about how much they helped her, how they gave her purpose." The son nodded, wiping his eyes. "There were pages about you too, Charlie. About how proud she was when you got back on your feet after the accident. She knew you were too stubborn to accept help directly, so she just did what she could." Charlie sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Outside that room, a community gathered to honor a woman who had touched their lives in countless small ways. Inside, her children had finally found their way back to her. And here he was, a former Hell's Angel, somehow part of it all. "We'd like to stay tonight," the daughter said. The nurses said it's okay. Yeah, the son added. We don't want her to be alone anymore. Charlie watched as they settled in for the night, pulling chairs close to the bed. The daughter draped her mother's crochet blanket across her lap. The sun dimmed the lights to a soft glow. For the first time since this all began, Charlie felt something like peace. Maggie wasn't alone anymore. Her children were here, and outside, an entire community held her in their hearts. Standing by the door, Charlie realized that Maggie's greatest gift hadn't been the help she'd given others, it was showing them how to help each other. Even now, in her final hours, she was bringing people together, healing old wounds, building bridges where there had only been walls. The morning sun filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across Maggie's bed. Charlie stood at the foot of her bed, his weathered hands gripping the metal rail. The steady beep of machines had become a haunting melody over the past few days, but now it seemed more like a countdown. Doctor. Martinez entered the room, her face showing the compassion of someone who had done this too many times before. Mr. McKenna, we need to discuss Maggie's situation. She gestured toward the chairs, but Charlie shook his head, preferring to stand. Her organs are failing, she explained gently. At this point, we're only prolonging the inevitable, and it may be causing her discomfort. Charlie's jaw tightened. He'd known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Through the window, he could see Maggie's children in the hallway, talking in hushed tones with a nurse. The past few days had changed them. Their cold exterior had melted away, replaced by raw grief and regret. I understand, Charlie managed. His voice rough, he cleared his throat. Let me talk to her kids first. When Maggie's children entered the room, their faces showed the same mix of pain and acceptance that Charlie felt. Sarah, her daughter, immediately went to her mother's side, taking her thin hand. Michael, the son, stood at the window, his shoulders tense. The doctor says, Charlie began, then had to start again. She's suffering. It's time to let her go peacefully. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Michael turned from the window, his eyes red. We trust your judgment, Charlie. You've done more for her these past few days than we did in years. The next hour passed in a blur of preparations. The hospital chaplain arrived, offering quiet prayers. A few of Maggie's friends from the community showed up, having heard the news through the grapevine. They filled the small room with whispered memories and gentle touches. Charlie watched as the nurse carefully removed the breathing tube. Dr. Martinez had explained that Maggie would simply drift away, like falling into a peaceful sleep. The machines were silenced one by one until only the heart monitor remained, its steady beeping now softer, less intrusive. Sarah held one of her mother's hands, while Michael held the other. Charlie moved to the corner of the room, giving the family their space. He felt like both an intruder and a guardian, watching over this intimate moment that he'd helped make possible. The chaplain's voice was soft as she read from her prayer book. Charlie wasn't much for religion, but the words brought a strange comfort to the room. He thought about all the times Maggie had tried to help him, how he'd pushed her away. Yet here she was, in her final moments, still teaching him about love and forgiveness. The beeping of the heart monitor began to slow. Sarah's quiet sobs filled the room, while Michael stood stoically, his grip on his mother's hand tightening. Charlie felt the tears welling up in his own eyes, but he didn't try to stop them. The tough exterior he'd maintained for so many years seemed meaningless now. Maggie's breathing became softer, more shallow. The sunlight through the window seemed to embrace her, giving her pale face a peaceful glow. The room held its collective breath as the monitor's beeps grew further apart. Then, with one final, gentle exhale, Maggie was gone. The monitor flatlined, its tone mercifully muted by the nurse. Sarah buried her face in Dill, her mother's shoulder, while Michael finally let his tears fall. Charlie stood in his corner, watching through blurry eyes as the family said their final goodbyes. For the first time since receiving that phone call at the bar, Charlie felt the heavy weight of guilt lift from his shoulders. He had done right by Maggie in the end. She hadn't died alone. She had passed surrounded by love, her family reunited at her side. The morning after Maggie's passing, Charlie sat at his kitchen table, staring at an old photo album he'd forgotten existed. His fingers trembled as he turned each page, memories flooding back of happier times with his own family. The silence in his house felt different now, less like a shield and more like a reminder of all he'd pushed away. He picked up his phone and, after several deep breaths, dialed his daughter's number. It rang 4 times before her hesitant voice answered. "Dad? Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I've been thinking, maybe we could grab coffee sometime?" The pause that followed felt endless, but her response brought unexpected warmth. "I'd like that." In the weeks that followed, Charlie found himself drawn to the places Maggie had frequented. The local shelter needed volunteers, and he discovered his mechanical skills could help fix their aging heating system. The satisfaction of helping others began to fill the emptiness he'd carried for so long. One afternoon, while working at the shelter, an elderly woman approached him. "You remind me of someone," she said, smiling. "Maggie Davis used to help here too. Always fixing things, always caring." Charlie's throat tightened. "I knew her," he managed, near the end. "She had a way of changing people," the woman said softly, "just by being herself." Those words stayed with Charlie as he expanded his involvement in the community. He started offering free motorcycle maintenance lessons to young people who couldn't afford repairs. His garage, once a lone, solitary space, became filled with the sounds of learning and laughter. The reunion with his daughter happened at a small coffee shop downtown. They talked for hours, awkward at first, then with growing ease. She showed him pictures of his grandchildren, kids he'd never met. They'd love to meet their grandpa, she said, hope in her eyes. "I'd like that," Charlie replied, his voice thick with emotion. His old biker friends noticed the change in him. Some teased him about going soft, but others began joining him at the shelter, bringing their own skills to help. The tough exterior they'd all worn for so long began to crack, revealing the humanity underneath. 1 month after Maggie's passing, Charlie stood before her gravestone in the cemetery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the peaceful grounds, and a gentle breeze rustled the flowers he'd brought. The stone was simple, just as she would have wanted it. He knelt down, placing the flowers carefully. His weathered hands traced the letters of her name, and tears he no longer tried to hide fell freely. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. "You knew what I needed, even back then, even when I was too stubborn to see it." The morning light warmed his face as he stood there, remembering her quiet strength, her unassuming kindness. Everything she'd done, helping him after his accident, supporting others in the community, even choosing him as her emergency contact, had been done without expectation of recognition or reward. "Thank you," he said softly, his words carried away by the gentle wind. "Thank you for showing me it's never too late to change." The early morning sun painted long shadows across the shelter's parking lot as Charlie pulled up on his motorcycle. The rumble of the engine died away, leaving behind the quiet chirping of birds. He'd been coming here every Tuesday and Thursday for the past few months, ever since Maggie's passing. Today was no different. Inside, the shelter buzzed with activity. Volunteers bustled around, setting up for breakfast service. The smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air. Charlie nodded to Maria, the shelter coordinator, as he made his way to the kitchen. "Morning, Charlie," she called out. "Got some bikes that need fixing in the back when you're done here." He smiled, grabbing an apron from the hook. "I'll take a look after breakfast service." The morning passed quickly as Charlie worked alongside the other volunteers. His hands, once used to gripping handlebars and throwing punches, now carefully ladled soup and arranged sandwiches. He'd found a different kind of peace in this work, something he never thought possible in his Hell's Angels days. After breakfast, Charlie headed to the shelter's workshop. 3 bikes stood waiting, donated for the Veterans Program. He ran his hands over the rusty frames, already mapping out what needed to be done. This was familiar territory, something he could do with his eyes closed. But now, instead of fixing bikes for racing, he was helping veterans get back on their feet. "Mind if I watch?" a young vet named Tommy asked, appearing in the doorway. Charlie had been teaching him basic maintenance over the past few weeks. "Grab a wrench," Charlie replied, gesturing to the toolbox. As they worked, Charlie thought about how different his life had become. His old crew still came around, but they'd noticed the change in him. Some even started helping out at the shelter themselves. It was like Maggie's kindness had created a ripple effect, touching lives she'd never even met. Later that afternoon, Charlie stopped by his daughter's house for dinner, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. His granddaughter Sarah ran to greet him, wrapping her small arms around his legs. The smell of home-cooked food wafted from the kitchen, and for a moment Charlie felt overwhelmed by the simple joy of it all. Back home that evening, Charlie sorted through his mail. Among the bills and advertisements, he found a letter with unfamiliar handwriting. Opening it, he recognized the return address. It was from Maggie's children. Charlie's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. The letter was simple, just a few paragraphs, but the words hit him hard. "Dear Charlie, we wanted to thank you for everything you did for our mother. We never understood why she listed you as her emergency contact, but now we do. She saw something in you that we're only now beginning to see ourselves. The kindness you showed her, and the way you brought us back together in her final days. We'll never forget that. Mom would be proud of the work you're doing now. We are too. With gratitude, Maggie's children." Charlie sat in his leather armchair, the letter clutched in his weathered hands. A lump formed in his throat as he read the words again. The simple acknowledgement of his actions, the recognition of his change, it meant more than he could express. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his wallet, right where he could always carry it with him. Tomorrow, he'd be back at the shelter, fixing more bikes, serving more meals, living the life that Maggie had somehow known he was capable of living all along. The knock on Charlie's garage door startled him from his work. He'd been bent over an old Harley, his weathered hands covered in grease, trying to coax life back into its tired engine. Looking up, he saw Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, standing in the doorway. "Charlie?" she called out hesitantly. "I hate to bother you, but my grandson's bicycle. The chain keeps falling off." Charlie wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "Bring it over, Mrs. Henderson. We'll take a look." As he worked on the small bike, more neighbors began to drift by. Tom, from across the street, wanted advice about his car's transmission. Sarah, a single mom who'd just moved in, needed help installing a security light. What started as one simple repair turned into an impromptu gathering in his garage. Charlie noticed how people lingered, sharing coffee from thermoses and swapping stories. It reminded him of the old days at the bar, but different, warmer somehow, more genuine. These weren't just drinking buddies, these were real connections forming right before his eyes. "You know, Mrs. Henderson said, watching him adjust her grandson's bike chain. "This neighborhood's changed since you started helping folks out. People talk to each other more now." Charlie's hands stilled for a moment. He hadn't thought about it that way. He'd just been doing what felt right, what Maggie would have done. But looking around his garage now, he could see what Mrs. Henderson meant. People who'd barely nodded to each other before were now chatting like old friends. The afternoon wore on, and Charlie found himself teaching a group of kids basic bike maintenance. Their eyes lit up as he explained how things worked, their questions coming rapid fire. He remembered being their age, that same excitement about machines, before life had hardened him. "My dad says you used to be in a motorcycle gang," one of the boys said, eyes wide with curiosity. Charlie nodded slowly. "That was a different life, kid. Sometimes people change." "For the better," Mrs. Henderson added quietly, patting his shoulder as she passed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garage floor, Charlie looked at what had become of his usually solitary workspace. Tools were scattered about, half-finished projects waited their turn, and the air hummed with conversation and laughter. It wasn't just about fixing things anymore, it was about fixing connections between people. He thought about Maggie then, about how she'd understood this simple truth long before he had. One small act of kindness could lead to another, then another, until suddenly you had something bigger than yourself. She'd planted that seed in him years ago, though. He'd been too blind to see it at the time. A young couple walked by with their dog, waving warmly. Last month, Charlie had helped them jump-start their car in the rain. Now they stopped to chat whenever they passed, bringing others into the growing web of neighborhood friendships. Standing in his garage doorway, Charlie felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense of belonging, of being part of something good. He wasn't just the ex-Hell's Angel anymore, or the lonely guy who kept to himself. He was becoming someone new, someone who mattered to this community in a way he never expected. Charlie smiled to himself, grateful for the opportunity to make a difference. Maggie had shown him the way, and now he was walking that path, one small act of kindness at a time. Charlie's hands shook slightly as he stirred the pot of beef stew on the stove. The recipe was simple, something his own mother used to make. But tonight, it felt like the most important meal he'd ever cooked. The kitchen timer ticked away, each second bringing him closer to Sarah's arrival. The doorbell rang, and Charlie's heart jumped. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and took a deep breath. The walk to the front door felt longer than usual, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. When he opened it, Sarah stood there, looking just as nervous as he felt. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she clutched a bottle of wine like a shield. "Come on in, kiddo." The old nickname slipped out before he could stop it. Sarah's eyes softened at the familiar word. The kitchen was warm and filled with the rich smell of stew. Charlie pulled out a chair for her at the small dining table, the same one where she'd done her homework as a child. Sarah sat down, her fingers tracing the familiar scratch marks on the wood. "Remember when I carved my initials here?" she asked, pointing to a faded SM near the edge. Charlie nodded, ladling stew into bowls. "So mad at you for that. Seems silly now, getting worked up over something so small." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Charlie watched as Sarah took her first spoonful of stew, and something in his chest loosened when she smiled. "Tastes just like Grandma's," she said. "Been thinking a lot about family lately," Charlie admitted, his voice rough. "About all the times I pushed people away when I should have pulled them closer." Sarah set down her spoon. "Dad, let me finish, please." Charlie cleared his throat. "I met someone recently, well, really knew her years ago but never properly understood what she was trying to teach me. She died alone, Sarah. But before she did, she brought her family back together. Made me realize what I've been missing all these years." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. "I missed you too, Dad. Even when I was angry, I missed you." Charlie reached across the table, taking his daughter's hand. It was smaller than his, but strong, just like her mother's had been. "I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything. For not being there when you graduated. For missing your wedding. For being too proud to ask for forgiveness. And I'm sorry for not trying harder to understand," Sarah whispered. "We both made mistakes." They ate quietly for a while, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of strangers. It was the gentle quiet of people finding their way back to each other. Sarah told him about her job teaching second grade, and Charlie shared stories about his work at the shelter. With each word, the distance between them grew smaller. As they finished their meal, Sarah helped him clear the table, just like she used to when she was young. Charlie watched her stack the dishes in the sink, and something clicked into place in his heart. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Working, eating, sleeping, getting through each day. This was about connection, about being part of something bigger than himself. "Would you like to come over again next week?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Maybe bring that husband of yours?" Sarah turned from the sink, her smile bright and real. "I'd like that, Dad. I'd like that a lot." The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple as Charlie sat on his motorcycle at the edge of town. The old leather seat creaked beneath him, worn and comfortable like an old friend. His weathered hands rested loosely on the handlebars, and the cooling metal of the engine ticked softly in the evening air. From this spot on Miller's Hill, he could see the whole town spread out below him. The hospital, where everything had changed, stood like a sentinel in the distance, its windows reflecting the dying sunlight. The shelter where he now volunteered 3 times a week was just visible, tucked between the older buildings downtown. Charlie took a deep breath, letting the crisp evening air fill his lungs. Everything felt different now. The weight that had pressed down on his shoulders for so many years had lifted, replaced by something lighter, more purposeful. He thought about how Maggie would have seen him now. Not the angry biker who'd pushed everyone away, but the man who'd finally learned to open his heart. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his daughter. "Thanks for dinner last night, Dad. Same time next week?" A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he typed back a quick yes. These simple exchanges still felt new, precious in their ordinariness. The memory of Maggie's hospital room floated through his mind. He could still see her there, quiet and still, yet somehow teaching him the most important lesson of his life. She had shown him that kindness wasn't weakness, it was the strongest force there was. Every meal he served at the shelter, every bike he fixed for a veteran who couldn't afford repairs, every moment spent rebuilding bridges with his family, it all traced back to her. The old Charlie would have laughed at the idea of spending his weekends helping others. Now, he couldn't imagine living any other way. The tough exterior remained. He was still a biker, after all, but it no longer served as armor against the world. Instead, it was just part of who he was, like the newfound softness in his heart. His gaze drifted to the small silver pendant hanging from his rearview mirror, a simple angel wing that Maggie's children had given him after the funeral. "Mom would have wanted you to have this," they'd said. It caught the last rays of sunlight, sending tiny flashes across his leather jacket. The evening wind picked up, carrying with it the familiar scents of his town, fresh-cut grass, distant barbecue smoke, and the sweet perfume of late summer flowers. Charlie straightened up on his bike, feeling the solid machine beneath him. He was different now, changed in ways he never expected, but some things remained constant. Like the freedom he felt on 2 wheels, the rush of the open road ahead. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky above. Charlie kicked his bike to life, the familiar rumble spreading through his body. The engine's steady purr spoke of possibilities, of roads yet to travel, of more lives to touch. He was ready for whatever came next, carrying Maggie's legacy of quiet kindness with him. He adjusted his mirrors, catching a glimpse of his own reflection. The hard lines of his face had softened somewhat, though his eyes still held that determined glint. He was still Charlie McKenna, still a Hell's Angel at heart, but now he was something more, someone who understood the power of compassion, the strength it took to care. The engine growled beneath him, eager to move. As the sky deepened to indigo, Charlie gave the bike some gas, ready to embrace the night ahead. Charlie pushed open the heavy door of the community center, stepping into the bustling main room. The morning light streamed through, tall windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Where silence had once ruled, now voices and laughter filled the air. Volunteers moved about with purpose, carrying boxes of supplies and chatting with the people they served. A young woman with kind eyes waved to him from behind the front desk. "Morning, Charlie. Director Wilson's waiting for you in her office." "Thanks, Sarah." His boots echoed on the worn linoleum floor as he made his way down the familiar hallway. The changes in the center amazed him. Just months ago, it had been a struggling operation, barely keeping its doors open. Now, the walls wore fresh paint, and new faces appeared every day. Some came seeking help, others offering it. Charlie couldn't help but think of Maggie. This was exactly the kind of quiet revolution she'd believed in. Director Wilson's office door stood open. She looked up from her desk, her silver hair caught in the morning light. "Charlie! Right on time." She gestured to a chair. "I've been looking over your proposal for the Veterans Program." Charlie settled into the chair, his weathered leather jacket creaking. "What do you think? Too ambitious?" "Actually," Wilson smiled, shuffling through some papers, "I think it's exactly what we need. Your experience with the motorcycle repair workshops has already drawn in quite a few vets. This could be the next step." Charlie nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "They need more than just job training. They need community, someone to understand what they're going through." "Like you did?" Wilson's voice was gentle. "Yeah." Charlie cleared his throat, like Maggie understood. "Even when I was too stubborn to see it." They spent the next hour hammering out details: housing assistance, counseling services, job placement programs. Charlie's mind wandered to his own dark days, when he'd pushed everyone away. If Maggie had managed to see past his tough exterior, maybe he could do the same for others. "We'll need more volunteers," Wilson said, making notes. "But word's getting around about what we're doing here. People want to help." Charlie glanced through the office window. The main room had grown even busier. A group of elderly women sorted through donated clothes while chatting with some younger volunteers. Near the coffee station, a former Hell's Angel, ISA, one of Charlie's old riding buddies, showed a teenager how to repair a bicycle. "It's what Maggie always said," Charlie murmured. "Everyone's got something to give." Wilson reached across the desk, patting his hand. "She'd be proud of you, Charlie. This place has come alive since you started helping." Charlie stood, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I'll start reaching out to some contacts at the VA hospital. Get the word out about the program." Making his way to the exit, Charlie passed familiar faces. Each one had a story. Each one mattered. A mother studying for her GED gave him a grateful nod. An elderly man he'd helped with home repairs last week raised his coffee cup in greeting. Outside, the morning had warmed. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery down the street approached, carrying a box of day-old pastries. "Charlie, thank goodness you're here. Could you help me get these inside?" "Of course, Mrs. Peterson." He took the box from her arms. "You're such a blessing to this community," she said, patting his arm. "We're all better for having you here." More people gathered around. A young father whose car Charlie had fixed, a teenager he'd mentored in the bike repair program, an elderly veteran who'd found purpose volunteering at the center. Their words of gratitude washed over him like a warm wave. Charlie smiled, feeling the truth of it all settle in his heart. This was what Maggie had seen in him all those years ago. Not the angry biker pushing the world away, but someone capable of making a difference. Someone worth believing in. Charlie wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag as the sleek car pulled into his driveway. The sound of car doors opening and closing echoed through the garage, and he recognized Maggie's children stepping out. They looked different now, more at peace than during those difficult days at the hospital. "Mr. McKenna!" the daughter called out, a warm smile on her face. "We hope we're not interrupting anything." Charlie shook his head, tossing the rag onto his workbench. "Just tinkering with this old Harley. And please, it's Charlie." He gestured to a couple of chairs near his tool chest. "Have a seat if you'd like." They settled into the chairs while Charlie leaned against his workbench. The garage felt smaller with them in it, but not uncomfortable. The sun cleared his throat, his hands clasped together. "We've been meaning to come by," he started, "to thank you properly for everything you did for Mom. Those last days, having us there, being able to say goodbye. We wouldn't have had that without you." Charlie shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the praise. "Your mother would have wanted you there. I just made some phone calls." "It was more than that," the daughter said softly. "You helped us understand who she really was. All those stories about how she helped people, the way she lived her life. We'd lost touch with that part of her." The son nodded. "And that's partly why we're here. We've been trying to honor her memory in our own way." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "We've started a foundation in Mom's name. The Maggie Davis Foundation," the daughter explained, her eyes bright with purpose. "It's designed to help people who are alone, dealing with illness or hardship, just like Mom did, but on a larger scale." Charlie listened, reminded of all the small acts of kindness Maggie had performed over the years. The meals she'd brought him after his accident, the quiet way she'd check on people in need. It seemed fitting that her legacy would continue this way. "That's real good," he said gruffly, genuinely moved. "Your mother would have been proud of that." The siblings exchanged a look before the daughter continued. "There's more, Charlie. We want you to be part of it." Charlie straightened up, surprised. "Me? You understood Mom in a way that even we didn't," the son explained. "You saw the impact she had on people's lives. We think you'd be perfect to help guide the Foundation's outreach programs. We're not asking you to wear a suit or sit in board meetings," the daughter added quickly, noting Charlie's hesitation. "But your experience helping at the shelters, working with veterans, that's exactly what the Foundation needs." Charlie ran a hand through his gray hair, overwhelmed by the offer. Here was a chance to continue what Maggie had started, to be part of something bigger than himself. His eyes drifted to the motorcycle he'd been working on, another project for a veteran in need. The son stood up, holding out the folder. "Take some time to think about it. Read through the materials. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We think Mom would have wanted you involved." Charlie reached out and took the folder, feeling the weight of it in his hands. This wasn't just paper. It was an opportunity to honor Maggie's memory in a real, lasting way. He looked at her children, seeing traces of their mother's kindness in their faces. "I'd be honored," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. Charlie stood in the doorway of the community center's main hall, his leather jacket feeling oddly out of place among the neat rows of chairs and decorated tables. The Foundation's first official meeting was about to begin, and his stomach churned with a familiar mix of anticipation and unease. "Mr. McKenna!" Sarah, one of the volunteers, waved him over. "We need your help with the motorcycle display." He made his way through the growing crowd, nodding at familiar faces. In the corner stood 3 vintage motorcycles, each one carefully restored. They'd be auctioned off later, with proceeds going to help families dealing with medical emergencies. "Just need to adjust the lighting," he muttered, fiddling with the spotlights. His rough hands, more used to working with engine grease than event planning, felt clumsy with the delicate equipment. Maggie's children, James and Linda, approached with clipboards in hand. Charlie, we've got 15 local businesses signed up as regular donors, Linda said, her eyes bright with excitement. And the shelter program is already helping 3 families. Charlie nodded, his throat tight. In just a few months, the foundation had grown from an idea into something real, something that mattered. He'd spent countless hours reaching out to his old contacts, surprising himself with how easily he could transform his network of bikers and mechanics into a web of support for those in need. The hall began filling up with people from all walks of life. Charlie recognized faces from the hospital, the shelter, and even some of his old riding buddies who'd cleaned up nice for the occasion. They all shared something in common now. They were here because of Maggie's legacy. James touched Charlie's shoulder lightly. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. But Charlie knew he had to. He made his way to the back of the room as the lights dimmed. One by one, people stood up to share their stories about Maggie. A young mother spoke about how Maggie had watched her children while she attended night classes. An elderly man recalled how she'd brought him meals every day after his wife passed away. Each story hit Charlie like a physical blow, revealing another facet of the woman he'd never truly known in life. He leaned against the wall, watching as tears flowed freely in the audience. These weren't just stories. They were testament to a life well lived, a life dedicated to others. The fundraiser portion began, and Charlie watched in amazement as hands shot up during the auction. His restored motorcycles went for far more than he'd expected, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the community coming together, about people recognizing the importance of taking care of each other. Standing there in the shadows, Charlie felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, not the superficial belonging of his biker days, but something deeper, more meaningful. He wasn't just existing anymore. He was part of something bigger than himself. As people shared their final stories of Maggie's impact on their lives, Charlie felt a familiar warmth in his chest. Pride, yes, but also gratitude. Gratitude for the woman who'd seen something in him worth saving, who'd trusted him enough to list him as her emergency contact, who'd given him one last chance to make things right. The room buzzed with conversation and purpose, and Charlie remained in his corner, watching it all unfold. This, he realized, was what life was truly about. The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow over Charlie and his daughter Sarah as they sat across from each other. Their coffee cups sat between them, steam rising in lazy spirals. Charlie's weathered hands wrapped around his mug, more for comfort than warmth. "I've been thinking a lot about Mom lately," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. Her voice was soft but steady. "About how things fell apart after the divorce." Charlie's throat tightened. He nodded, taking a careful sip of his coffee. "I wasn't there for you like I should have been," he admitted. The words felt heavy, but they needed to be said. "After your mother left, I couldn't handle it. Got lost in my own anger." Sarah's eyes glistened. "I used to wait by the window every Sunday, hoping you'd show up for our visits." She traced the rim of her cup with her finger. "Eventually, I stopped waiting." "God." "Sarah." Charlie's voice cracked. "I was so wrapped up in my own pain, in the bike gang, in proving I didn't need anyone. I convinced myself you were better off without me." He reached across the table, hesitating before placing his hand over hers. "I was wrong. So wrong. I needed my dad," she whispered, tears now falling freely. "But I understand better now. What happened with Maggie? It made me realize people can change, that it's never too late." Charlie squeezed her hand. "When I was sitting with Maggie in that hospital room, all I could think about was you. About all the moments I missed. All the times I should have been there. Remember when I was little?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "You used to take me for rides on your bike. I felt so safe with my arms wrapped around you, like nothing could hurt me. You were fearless." Charlie chuckled, his own eyes growing misty. Your mother hated those rides, but you always made sure I wore a helmet, Sarah added, even when you didn't wear one yourself. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the memories wash over them. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversation around them, but in their corner, time seemed to stand still. I'm sorry too, Dad, Sarah said finally. I could have reached out more, could have tried harder to understand what you were going through. Charlie shook his head. You were just a kid. It wasn't your job to fix things. He took a deep breath. But I'm here now. If you'll let me be. I'd like that, Sarah smiled, wiping her eyes. You know, watching you these past few weeks, seeing how you've changed, how you're helping people through the foundation, I'm proud of you, Dad. Charlie felt his heart swell. The word Dad, so casual from her lips now, meant everything. I'm trying to be someone you can be proud of. Someone Maggie would be proud of too. Sarah straightened up, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small photo album. I found this the other day. Pictures from when I was little. She slid it across the table. I thought maybe we could look through it together. Fill in some of those missing years. As they flipped through the pages, sharing stories and memories, Charlie felt the weight of years of regret beginning to lift. Their laughter mixed with tears as they reconnected over coffee that had long since gone cold. Finally, Sarah closed the album and looked at her father with bright eyes. Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe we could take a trip together? Just you and me? Charlie's heart leapt at the suggestion. I'd love that, sweetheart. I'd love that more than anything. The morning sun filtered through the autumn leaves as Charlie McKenna walked through Wilson Park. His boots crunched on the gravel path, and a cool breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. He wasn't wearing his leather jacket today, just a simple flannel shirt and well-worn jeans. The change in his wardrobe reflected the change in his heart. Charlie paused near the old oak tree, remembering how different things had been just months ago. Back then, he'd been a man trapped in his own anger, wearing his tough exterior like armor. Now, that heaviness was gone, replaced by something lighter, more meaningful. His phone buzzed, a message from his daughter about their upcoming fishing trip. Charlie smiled, his weathered face softening as he typed a reply. These simple exchanges still felt new and precious, like delicate seedlings that needed nurturing, but they were growing stronger every day. The veterans support group he'd started at the community center was flourishing. 3 times a week, he sat with men and women who carried the same shadows he once did. They talked about their struggles, their victories, and their hopes. Charlie shared his story openly now, including how a quiet woman named Maggie had once shown him kindness when he least deserved it. Sometimes, he'd tell them, it takes someone believing in you before you can believe in yourself. As he rounded the curve in the path, Charlie noticed the Foundation's latest project taking shape. A small workshop where veterans could learn trades and find purpose through work. Maggie's children had helped secure the funding, turning their mother's legacy into something tangible and lasting. The morning light caught something metallic ahead. A young man, probably in his early 20s, was crouched beside an overturned bicycle. Tools were scattered around him, and frustration was evident in his hunched shoulders. Charlie recognized that posture, the weight of pride making it hard to ask for help. Without hesitation, Charlie changed course. Having trouble there? He called out, keeping his voice gentle. The young man looked up, startled. Yeah, he admitted reluctantly, chains completely jammed. I thought I could fix it, but... He gestured helplessly at the mess of gears. Charlie knelt beside him, his knees protesting slightly. Mind if I take a look? The young man nodded, and Charlie began examining the bicycle. His hands, once used to throw punches and grip handlebars too fast and too hard, now moved with careful precision. "See here?" Charlie pointed to where the chain had twisted. "It's not as bad as it looks. Let me show you how to set it right." He walked the young man through the repair step by step, just as he'd done countless times at the veterans' workshop. When they finished, the young man stood, relief evident on his face. "Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it." Charlie nodded, brushing off his hands. "Any time. We all need a little help sometimes." As he turned to leave, he caught the young man testing the pedals, a smile spreading across his face. Walking away, Charlie felt that familiar warmth in his chest, the one that came whenever he reached out to help others. It was the same feeling he imagined Maggie must have had all those years ago when she helped a angry, hurting biker who didn't know how to accept kindness. He smiled to himself, knowing that somewhere Maggie would be proud. The cycle of kindness she'd started continued, flowing outward like ripples in a pond, touching life after life in ways that might never be known but would always matter. The morning sun streamed through Charlie's kitchen window, casting warm patches of light across the wooden table. His daughter, Sarah, sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Maps and travel brochures were scattered between them, their edges curling with possibility. "I can't believe we're actually doing this, Dad," Sarah said, her smile reaching her eyes. "A whole week together on the road." Charlie nodded, his weathered hands tracing the route they'd mapped out along the coast. "Been too long since we did anything like this." His voice was gruff but gentle. "Remember those camping trips when you were little? Before everything fell apart?" "Sit." Sarah's voice held no accusation now, just a quiet acknowledgement of their past. "Yeah, I do. You taught me how to build a fire." Charlie felt his throat tighten. "I wasn't the best father back then. Too caught up in my own anger, my own pride. But you're here now." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "That's what matters." They spent the morning planning their stops, marking places they wanted to see. It was different from the old days when Charlie would have insisted on pushing through, racing to the destination. Now, he found himself wanting to savor every moment, every small town, every sunset. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, shuffling through some photos she'd brought. "I always thought you were this tough guy who didn't need anyone. But watching you these past few months, with the foundation and everything you're doing for the community, it's like meeting a whole new person." Charlie looked down at his coffee cup, emotions washing over him. "Maggie taught me that," he said quietly. "Sometimes the toughest thing isn't pushing people away, it's letting them in." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I've been learning that too, Dad. After Mom died, I built my own walls. But seeing you change, it gave me hope." The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on memories both painful and sweet. They talked about the Foundation's latest projects, about Sarah's job, about the small victories and everyday challenges that made up their lives. Charlie found himself sharing stories he'd never told before, about his own struggles, about the moments of kindness he'd overlooked, about the peace he'd finally found. "You seem different," Sarah observed, watching him carefully. "Happier." Charlie thought about it, about the journey that had brought him here. From the rough-edged biker who'd received that fateful call from the hospital to the man he was now, someone who volunteered at shelters, who mentored troubled youth, who was rebuilding bridges he'd once burned. "I am," he admitted. "Took me long enough to figure out what really matters in this life. Not the bikes, not the tough guy act. It's this." He gestured between them. "Connection, family, being there for others like Maggie was there for me." Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "She'd be proud of you, Dad." Charlie gazed out the window, watching leaves dance in the breeze. The morning light painted everything in soft, hopeful colors, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The path ahead was clear now, not always easy, but right. He'd found his way home, not to a place, but to the people and purpose that made life worth living. Charlie stood at the back of the community center, watching as people filled every seat in the large room. The afternoon sun filtered through tall windows, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Banners celebrating the Maggie Davis Foundation hung from the walls, and photographs of people helped by the organization lined tables near the entrance. His weathered hands gripped the back of an empty chair as the first speaker approached the podium. A young woman, barely in her 20s, stepped up with trembling hands clutching a piece of paper. 3 years ago, I was living in my car, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. Miss Maggie found me in the parking lot of the grocery store. She didn't just give me food or money, she gave me hope. She helped me find a job, got me into temporary housing, and checked on me every single week until I got back on my feet. Charlie's throat tightened. He remembered how Maggie had done the same for him, though he'd been too proud to acknowledge it at the time. The young woman's story was followed by others. A veteran who'd struggled with PTSD, an elderly man who'd lost his wife and found purpose through volunteering, a single mother who'd needed someone to believe in her. Each story painted a picture of Maggie that Charlie had only glimpsed, a woman whose quiet strength had held up so many others. He watched as people dabbed at their eyes, nodding in recognition of their own experiences with her kindness. A local business owner spoke about how Maggie had helped him keep his restaurant open during tough times. Not through money, but through organizing community support and volunteering her time. She never asked for recognition, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She just showed up every day, ready to help. The stories continued, weaving together a tapestry of lives touched by one woman's dedication to helping others. Charlie felt his chest swell with pride, knowing he was now part of continuing her work. He thought about how far he'd come from that day in the biker bar when he'd received the hospital's call. Near the front of the room, he could see Maggie's children sitting together, their heads held high despite the tears in their eyes. They'd transformed their grief into purpose, channeling their mother's spirit into the foundation that bore her name. When they finally stood to speak, the room fell silent. Our mother never sought the spotlight, Maggie's daughter began, her voice clear and strong. She believed that true kindness didn't need an audience, but today we want to celebrate how she changed lives, one small act at a time. Her brother continued. Through this foundation, we've been able to help hundreds of people in just a few months. But more importantly, we've seen how Mom's example has inspired others to reach out, to show up for their neighbors, to be the kind of person she was. Charlie leaned against the wall, his heart full as he listened. He understood now what Maggie had seen in him all those years ago. Not the angry biker pushing everyone away, but someone capable of the same kindness she had shown others. The foundation wasn't just about helping people. It was about creating a ripple effect of compassion throughout the community. As Maggie's children finished their speech to thunderous applause, Charlie remained in his spot at the back of the room. He watched them embrace each other, their faces glowing with pride and purpose. In that moment, he felt more connected to Maggie's legacy than ever before, knowing that her spirit of kindness would continue to touch lives through the work they were all doing together. The roar of Charlie's motorcycle engine echoed through the streets as he guided his bike through familiar roads. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and the wind whipped at his leather jacket. Each turn brought a new memory. Each street corner held a different piece of his story. He passed the old biker bar where it all began, now looking somehow smaller than he remembered. The neon signs weren't lit yet, but he could still hear the phantom echoes of laughter and the clink of bottles from that fateful night when the hospital called. Charlie smiled beneath his helmet, remembering how angry and confused he'd been, how reluctant to get involved in someone else's life. The hospital came into view as He rounded the next corner. Charlie slowed down, taking in the stark white building that had changed everything. He remembered standing in that sterile hallway, staring at Maggie's door, not knowing that he was about to embark on a journey that would transform his life completely. His bike rumbled past the community center, where just yesterday he'd helped organize another veterans support meeting. The parking lot was full, a sight that always warmed his heart. He thought about all the lives being rebuilt inside those walls, all the second chances being given and taken, just like his own. Charlie guided his motorcycle through the residential streets, passing Maggie's old house. The new family living there had planted flowers in the front yard, bright splashes of color that reminded him of Maggie's quiet but persistent kindness. He could almost see her there, tending to her garden, watching over the neighborhood with that gentle smile of hers. The streets began to wind upward as Charlie headed for the hills overlooking the town. His daughter had joined him up here last weekend, both of them sharing stories and plans for their upcoming trip. The memory of her laughter, so like her mother's, still rang in his ears. After years of distance, they were finally building something real together. The bike's engine growled as Charlie climbed the last stretch of road leading to the summit. He remembered the countless times he'd ridden this same path in his younger days, angry at the world, running from everything and everyone. Now, each mile felt like coming home rather than escaping. At the top, Charlie cut the engine and kicked down the stand. The sudden silence was broken only by the cooling tick of his motorcycle and the soft whisper of the wind. Below him, the town spread out like a map of his transformation. The bar, the hospital, the community center, all the places that had played a part in his journey. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, reminding Charlie of all the sunsets he'd watched alone, before understanding the importance of sharing life's moments with others. He reached up and removed his helmet, feeling the cool evening breeze on his face. Charlie looked out over the town, his town, where he'd once been just another angry biker and was now something else entirely. A friend, a father, a helper, a man Maggie would have been proud to know. His eyes misted slightly as he thought of her, the woman who had seen something in him worth saving, even when he couldn't see it himself. "Thank you, Maggie," he whispered to the wind, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." The sun continued its descent, a golden orb sinking toward the horizon, and Charlie felt a deep peace settle over him. He watched the light fade, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, new chances to be the man he'd become. "It's never too late to change," Charlie says softly as the sun dips below the horizon.